Learn Persian with Chai and Conversation, Growing Up Irooni interview with Arya Shahi. Well, Arya Shahi, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you. Merci,
I'm
merci.
so excited to talk to you.
Yeah.
We came across each other, or I guess it was a post that I did about I love you. Or I don't want to give too much away too. There's like spoiler alerts, right?
Totally,
But,
yeah. Let's get right to it. Let's
okay,
get right to it.
I know. Can you just read the last 5 pages? I did a post about I love you versus I like you, and then you were like,
Yeah.
I've written a book. Can we talk?
Yeah.
And so it was a big run up to reading this book.
That's so funny. Yeah, I mean, look, that's been with me my whole life, right? Like, I mean, like so much of what's in this book has been with me my whole life, but like the I love you, I like you thing is wild to me. Like,
Yeah. Which do you want to tell people a little bit?
So
if people are unfamiliar.
For the non-Farsi speakers in the audience, you know, in Farsi, I've always struggled with saying I love you to people in my family because you just kind of don't do it in Farsi. It's really wild to me because it's actually a pretty affectionate and, you know, passionate culture.
Right.
But here we are as Americans throwing around the term I love you bud, love you bro, love you mom, love you dad. And you actually can't do that in Farsi. So in Farsi we say kheli dost daram, which is like you know,
I really like you.
I really like you. That's about as much love as you're gonna get from a parent.
Yeah, literally.
No,
But since I was little too, we would do that at the end of phone calls. We'd say, "Okay, I love you."
Oh yeah.
You just like default to that. But okay, going back. So we're here talking to Arya about his new book out, Impossible Thing to Say, which again, spoiler alert, that is the impossible thing to say.
That is the impossible thing to say, yeah.
Yeah, but I had such a wonderful time reading this book. I could not put it down. And I'm just going to show, if anyone's watching this, this is both a podcast that you can listen to, and it's also a video.
Oh,
so
really?
If you're watching, you can kind of see the structure of the book. Like, I started reading it, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess the first page is in poetry, but it's the whole thing. It's really interesting. I've never read anything like it. It's so unique. And honestly, it seems like it's like written for all of our Chai and Conversation listeners. It addresses every issue all of you have that write me about language learning, about difficulties with parents, grandparents, the difficulty of growing up in the United States, being in a different culture. I mean, it is all there. And for me personally, I am a Shakespeare fanatic. I love Shakespeare. So I know. So I started reading and I was like, is this gonna have Shakespeare in it too? And it's all Shakespeare, which I love. I mean, to me, whenever people are like, oh, Iranian poetry is amazing, you just can't do that with English. I'm like, have you read Shakespeare? Have you? Because he's done some cool things with the English language too. But I think there's so many parallels with Shakespeare and Farsi. And anyway, so that's in there. And then there's the theme of, you know, talking in different languages and who you are as a person when you're talking different languages. I mean, it's all there. So thank you for writing this book. That's the end of the interview. Thank you. Everyone go read the book.
That's great. That's all I need. That's I love that. It's wild to hear you speak about that. I mean, I think that's why I've always been such a fan of what you do, and it's kind of surreal to be on the show with you because, you know, you are one of kind of the ambassadors of that, right? Of that not only the Persian language, but also like the idea of what it means to learn a language. It's a really fascinating process, and I'm so fortunate to be able to like create a lot of work that wrestles with this.
Right.
You know, for people that don't know, I'm actually from the theater background. I'm a playwright and actor, and all my formal training is as an actor. So I find myself continuously pulled into this idea of what happens when people can't understand each other. But my core experience with that in my life was with my grandparents. So I think a lot of people, when they don't understand each other, revert to a place of, you know, maybe expecting malice or questioning people's intentions. And because my core experience with that was with my grandparents, that's just never where I go. I never go there. I always go to, I'm assuming the best of this person because I want to, you know, I want to love them and I want them to love me. And that's kind of bled into how I create my work. And it's really actually kind of scary to have this conversation because I've done so many interviews I'm in a group called PigPen, and we've done so many interviews over the years, but it's never really been about Iranian culture, right? Like this is the first time I've kind of tackled the
Wow.
thing that has just been under the surface for my whole life. So yeah, so it's exciting. Yeah, it's exciting.
Very cool. Well, I'm so curious. So, first of all, again, like I said, everyone should read this book. I don't want to give too many spoilers about the book,
It's
but
all
I
good.
am wondering, just in general, how much of this is like autobiographical? It sounds like it's pretty. Is this just your life story, or is Omid Arya?
Omid is a thinly veiled avatar for Arya.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
How thin?
pretty thin. No, we're not going to get to the logistics of memoir or
Yeah.
autobiography.
Okay.
No. Actually, I'm happy to have the conversation. I think it's important. I took so many of the things that happened to me over the course of maybe 10 years and put them into 4 months of this kid's life. So
Okay.
I think by that mere fact, he's different than I am. I think he's
Right.
dealing with a lot much more quickly than I had to. And I mean, his name is Omid Sultani, and my name is Arya Shahi. So there's like a little nod for you for the Farsi speakers out there. I mean, they both kind of mean king, or both of our last names have similar meanings. But yeah, to be honest, as I was writing, I couldn't stick to memoir because I think that's just a different form than I'm used to. And I needed something to draw me out of my own life and allow me to kind of write as a writer rather than like as a journalist. Like I feel like memoirs and autobiographies are kind of like journalism of your life.
Mhm.
And that wasn't resonating with me. So I placed kind of like a plot bomb in the middle of the book that never happened to me. And that allowed me to really think of Omid as separately, uh, as a different person than I am. So yeah, so a lot of it is based on my life, but there are some big things that happened to him. One in particular that just didn't happen to me, and that really opened me up.
Got it. So then the whole experience of your grandparents coming from Iran, that did happen to you?
That did, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so then what was that like? So at this point, like Omid in the story can understand Persian, but he can't really speak it. So tell me, putting the book aside, tell me about your childhood. Like where were you born in Tucson, and what was tell me everything.
That's great. Yeah, it is funny. No, I was born in San Diego, but then my parents moved to Tucson when I was like 5 months old. I think they were, back and forth between California and Arizona before I was born, and then when I was born, I think they decided to set up shop in Tucson, Arizona, which is funny because I see echoes of that in my own life now. Like I'm 36, I'm thinking about having kids. I'm like, oh man, that's a big decision when the first kid comes along. So we moved back to Tucson, or I was an infant and I was raised there. And yeah, one of the big differences between me and Omid is I actually went to Iran a couple times before my grandparents moved to the States. So those were really formative experiences. I went to Iran pre 9/11 twice, and
See a shadow of a.
oh yeah, hi, that's my wife. No, it's all good. It's all good. We'll talk about her later. She's dope.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I went to Iran twice, and I started realizing that there was something really weird happening culturally when you go to somewhere that you think you're gonna fit in and you don't, because you're American.
How old were you the first time?
I think I was maybe 4th or 5th grade.
Okay.
Like young, maybe even younger, maybe like 3rd grade, and then the second time was like 6th
And how
grade.
was what was your experience with the Persian language?
I absorbed it like a
Okay.
sponge. So Omid's kind of trajectory in the book with the language is mine as well. Like I spoke fluently when I was a kid. I was, doing the Hafez and the Rumi, like at the Maimunis, like that was me when I was like 3. And my parents were like,
Nice.
oh, this kid is like, this is our star child. And then I started school and I just stopped speaking Farsi because it just didn't make sense. And my parents were really, I think, consciously trying to support me in, making friends and fitting in and assimilating. And so when I went back to Iran, I soaked it all in. And I think my Farsi it was really coming back to me in a big way. But yeah, I think of language as a muscle that you just have to work out and you have to practice it. And when you don't practice it, it goes away.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
you had a sibling as well?
yeah. His name's Arteen.
Okay. Younger?
Younger.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what was his like language experience? Was he speaking as much as you, or?
No, me and Artin to this day are a little competitive about whose Farsi is better. And when I say better, I mean just passable.
Yeah, right.
But Artin and I think we're on very similar paths. I think Artin had later in life, when he got to college, he had more Iranian friends than I did. So he started speaking socially. And then there was a moment where I think his Farsi got a little bit better than mine because he had friends to speak it with. And then I started, I think, really caring more about wanting to speak. And to this day, I don't know whose is better, but no, we're on very similar paths.
And when was it that your grandparents, did they move to the U.S.?
They did.
Okay.
Yeah, they moved here. My mom's parents moved here. Actually both sets of grandparents moved to the States.
Wow.
Yeah,
to Tucson.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. The second set is not in the book at all. My dad's parents are not in the book, but yeah, my mom's they all moved to the States eventually, so everyone was there, and that was really unique and lovely.
Yeah. And how was your relationship with them? Like, what was the language trajectory with them? Was it like it was in the book where you just had a lot of difficulty talking to them?
Yeah.
Or how was it?
Yeah, lots of miming.
Yeah, right.
Lots of miming, lots of body language stuff. I to be totally honest, I think I got in my own way. I was just too ashamed. I was too ashamed to speak it.
I don't think that's totally on you. I think that that's something that I'm realizing more and more as I'm doing this program. A lot of people, like, we have a very critical culture. And I think that it gets in the way of people being open to trying things and like making mistakes. And so if a kid comes and speaks, Persian, we're immediately like, oh, why isn't it better? Like, why do you have an accent? Why is this? Why is that? And people get embarrassed. So that's actually something it's taken me years to figure this out. I'm like, oh, this is why, like, you can't, in American culture, you get a certificate for just trying. And like, we do not do that. You don't get a certificate for not getting an A+, you get criticized.
I actually, this is amazing that you're saying this because it's resonating in a really huge way. I realized later in life when I was in college. So I know you started this podcast about Nimrunis, right? Like,
yes. Raising Nimrunis.
Yeah, exactly. And my parents are both Persian, both Iranian, but my mom's sister married an American. My Uncle Roy, and their kids are half. And I remember coming back from college. At this point, I was at Carnegie Mellon, and I came back home, and I realized my youngest cousin, her name's Layla, and she's half American and half Iranian, and she is like speaking Farsi with my grandparents, and I'm like, and I'm just like, my first thought was, how brave. I was like, wait. And I think it's because, and again, I'm not blaming anyone or anything, but like, I think it's because there was such a cultural expectation of me being like, I'm the oldest on both sides. I'm the oldest boy.
Yeah.
And I was the first, born in America. And like, there was such a weight of like, oh, his Farsi he's not Iranian. Like, what's going on here?
Right.
Whereas with Layla, she's the youngest girl. And she's just like, I want to connect with my roots. And her and my grandmother have this wonderful relationship to this day. Oh my
goodness, amazing.
And my grandma now speaks English because she wanted to learn so that she could speak with Layla in her native.
Wow.
Like, it's one of the coolest things I've gotten to experience. And it taught me a lot about how this is a very different process for people. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of a weight of expectation.
Yes.
On Iranians, but it's fascinating to me about Nimrunis because like my wife is white, and I've been thinking a lot about like, wow, how does my experience translate to my kids? And it's going to be different.
Yeah. I'll ask you about that later too. I'm excited to hear your thoughts. But there's one passage in the book that I particularly loved where like Baba Jun, the grandfather in the story, is talking. I think he's on the phone with Omid, saying all this stuff like, this is how I think things are. This is it. And at the end, Omid just says, "Merci, Baba Jun." But he has all these thoughts. He's like, I don't think he was totally right. I don't think he was, I want to like have a nuanced conversation. But it's fascinating how the level of language you talk affects how much nuance you can have even. Like things become black and white, things get dumbed down. You can't really tell your true feelings the way you could if you had a really good grasp of language.
Yeah, I mean, that's a feeling that that's straight from my life. I think it's straight from a lot of our lives, right? Is that you are limited by your language, in your ability to even define yourself. Forget about like having a conversation. I think it's really hard when, at least for me as a person who values language. I mean, this happens everywhere. I went to Japan on my honeymoon and I was there for 3 weeks and I loved every moment of it, but I was getting really tired of feeling stupid, right? I just felt so stupid by the end of that trip because I was like, no, I'm like, I promise I have thoughts. I promise I have thoughts. And to have that feeling in your own family is like, it's a lot to carry around, I think. So I have to show them that I love them and try to communicate my personality. And it's funny, you know, I do speak Farsi more than I'm probably putting on right now or letting on right now, but all of my Farsi is like in an effort to communicate my sense of humor and my contextual awareness, right?
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, it's like it's all it's all like, you know, expressions and swear words and like just like the stuff that I know. It's like almost like virtue signaling, you know, in both contexts. Like whenever I meet another Iranian-American, this has been happening a lot lately, you know, where I think the community is having this huge like renaissance right now.
Absolutely.
I'll like drop into Farsi every couple of sentences just to virtue signal that like, yo, like I know it, but I'd rather stay in English. Like there's always that moment where like you meet a brand new Iranian American and you don't know where they're at on the spectrum because you're like, did you grow up like in like Tehrangeles? Like, are you about to like just go for it? And I'm like, I can't do that.
Right.
But I'm gonna acknowledge that I love the language by using it in the way that I can.
Right.
Sorry, yeah, I just ranted on that.
Well, this also made me, I mean, just talking like this for the first time, like made me feel this immense sadness for our parents' generation.
Yeah.
For like always feeling that way. Like they never had that grasp of English, you know, like, so in the family, maybe like we feel that way with them when speaking Farsi, but then they just like go out in the world and they're constantly not like seen as a complete a human as they are. Oh,
I mean, have you
it's really hard.
Have you read or seen the play English that just came out last year?
I didn't see English. I saw the other one.
Yeah.
Wish You Were Here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was?
I mean, I just bring that up because English is exactly what you were just talking about. It's the experience of, it's actually about Iranians in 2008, and I'm about to direct the production of it in San Diego, which I'm really excited
amazing.
about. Yeah, so
Amazing. Okay.
I get to direct English at the Old Globe, and it feels like a really beautiful moment because it's kind of the reverse of the story that I just spent 3 years telling, which is like an American trying to learn Farsi, or Iranian American trying to learn Farsi. This is about a bunch of Iranians trying to learn English and maybe leave the country because they're in Karaj in 2008, and yeah, it's exactly that, right? Like I think our commonality is that we struggle across generation and across cultural divide because I think our, you know, the diaspora has been just blown apart since 1979, and I think we're all in different places and looking for that community, and language is a big part of that, man. Language is the one of the biggest parts of that.
Right. Which another big thing that you explore in this book is the modes of language as well, like both the modes of, like you mentioned, theater, like using someone else's words and interpreting it through your own experiences in your own body. And then, you know, Omid gets really into rap, and that's a whole nother layer of like how to express yourself with a different way of communication. So all of these are just woven together in a really beautiful way. I really enjoyed every bit of it. But we are also recording this on September 11th.
Yeah.
And September 11th does play a big part in this book. I always love talking to Iranians that grew up in places other than Los Angeles. And, you know, we kind of have an idea of the experience of LA Iranians. But what was your experience as a Tucson Iranian of 9/11 and like everything that happened? That was a huge part of Omid's experience growing up.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think my experience was similar similar to a lot of kids in that immediately all my experience was okay, school's over today. Like school's over today, which is already weird, right?
What grade were you in? You're 36, so you were in middle school?
I was a freshman.
Freshman, okay.
Freshman in high school.
Okay.
And And yeah, I think school being over and being sent home, uh, it, immediately you know something's up. I mean, I actually put this in the book, but me and my mom, we heard about it driving to school on the morning radio show, and we literally thought it was a prank, like because they do just a bunch of prank calls. So we were like, okay,
Oh,
that was
wow.
like that was weird. And then I just like jumped out of the car and went to school, and then yeah, and then it just wasn't a prank, and I just remember a lot of feeling anxious, but not for the reasons that we would culturally expect today. Like, you don't know that it's going to be such a pivotal moment in history. For me, I was just an anxious kid. I was just like terrified at the idea that anyone would fly a plane into a building. That's like, guys, like that's something that's just in the cultural landscape now. That wasn't there for us. We were like, it's so weird to think that, like, as a kid, I just kept thinking, like, are we all just like constantly on the brink of death? Like, I was like a really anxious kid. And I think that's what stuck with me, is that like I had just witnessed this horrific tragedy on a global
Right.
scale. And I wasn't even thinking that, like, oh, this is going to stick with you in a different way than all of your white friends.
Yeah.
It didn't even register for months. And maybe I'm, I think I also can't speak for 14-year-old self, because, I do have 20 years of processing. So,
Did
but
it change the way your teachers talk to you or the way your classmates talk to you, or?
yeah, I mean, I don't remember that stuff.
Okay.
And I'm just being honest, because I think sometimes there's so many stories of just outright racism and prejudice.
Yeah. And what was it like in Tucson in general? Was it like, was there a lot of diversity, or what was I don't know
No,
anything.
I grew up Mexican.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
just, yeah.
there were Mexicans.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, I grew up Latinx. It was great. No, yeah, there's diversity in that sense. But in terms of just Iranians, I think I was like one of 3 kids that I really knew were Iranian, and the community is very small, and other than that, it's predominantly white. And Tucson, I like to describe Tucson as kind of like a liberal bubble in Arizona, but even that is like contextually something, like you have to consider the context, because I've now lived in LA and New York, and
Right.
Tucson's not a liberal city by those standards, but by
Yeah.
Arizona standards, by comparing it to Phoenix, Scottsdale, those areas, that it's much bluer. So I don't know. These are all things that I continue to process, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think we try to label communities as being this or that, and I think
Mhm.
Tucson wasn't. I think Tucson, I was in a very particular place. I was raised, upper middle class, so I had a lot of privilege in that way. So I mean, I remember continually thinking into my early 20s that, like, we were living and this is really interesting, because we're talking about 9/11, but then
Yeah.
jump to 2008, and Obama's elected, and we're living in like a post-racial America. And I saw that as like this reinforcement of my beliefs that, like, no, it's not about race. It's about socioeconomic status. Like, I was one of those kids, right? I was one
Right.
of those like little young Republicans, I guess. Right.
Right.
And I'm not like, I actually wasn't, but like,
Right.
but
Right.
that
Right.
was a belief of like, oh, maybe this race thing is not as big of a deal as people make it out to be. And, I've just been completely schooled by life, by aging, by really going back and re-examining things that were said. There were plenty of microaggressions throughout my life. There were
Right.
plenty of moments where I was terrified that something was going to happen to my parents, and it was
Right.
clearly because we were Iranian. There was no other reason for me to be scared.
Right.
Airport security is like a traumatic thing. Like, anytime a cop would be around, that was traumatic. I remember we did Charshan Besuri, and like just cops just showed up everywhere, and I was like, well, this is it. This is the end.
Oh.
This is the end of
Yeah.
my family. We're all going to jail because of Charshan Besuri.
Right.
Like these things, like they're in there. So
Right.
it's hard to really process, because I don't like telling like particular anecdotes of like, this is when people called me these names, because I think it's
Right.
actually way more compounded than that.
Right. Have you ever watched the show Pen 15? Did you
No.
watch that?
No.
Oh man. it has a really good example of that, of the girl is Asian, and then when she's little, like they make her be this character, this like they have her be like the servant character in this play that they're doing. And then, at the time she's like, "Oh, we're having fun. We're like laughing." And then it's two 30-something-year-olds playing like 12-year-olds.
I know that.
So like, yeah. So they have like the ability to like look back and be like, "Oh, that was, microaggression," like you're saying, that was like all this stuff that when you're at the time, you can't really process it that way. It's just like when you go back and look at it.
I mean, that's right. That's in the book, right? Like, so
Yeah.
in Impossible, Omid gets cast as Bottom the Weaver
Exactly.
in Midsummer, and I played Bottom in my life twice.
Interesting.
And I loved playing Bottom. I loved playing, but that is like actually very much true to Arya. Like that Bottom was my kind of path into acting,
Wow.
and seeing like my friends respond to me being, a clown and like
Right.
a really, and I loved it. And I think I when I finished the book, I gave it to my fellow creators in PigPen Theatre Company. They're
Yeah.
like, these guys are my brothers. We've been together for 16 years. We've been all over the world together. And I had all these, and I've had some of the most thoughtful conversations with them about just like the world and life. And one of the guys reads it and gives it back, and he's like, "This is phenomenal, but you just wrote a novel about typecasting, like about how you've been
Wow.
typecast your whole life."
Right.
And it's tough to kind of admit that that's one of the reasons I had to write it, because I've always struggled. I think any actor goes through this. I've always struggled with, why am I being put in this part and not the part that I want?
Right.
And I think that gets conflated into like, oh, you just have a big ego, you want a bigger part. And it's like, no, at a certain point, you do this long enough and you recognize patterns, and you have to take that into account. And I think this book used to be called The Weaver. So like I wrote the book and I called it The Weaver because I think that was just like the essence of why I was writing. It was about Bottom the Weaver. It was about my dad who sells rugs. And it was about Omid, who's weaving these cultures together, right?
Right.
And I think there's a lot in the book about that. And I don't know. That's the other thing, is like I actually don't know what to talk about in the book, because there's so much in there that I feel like there's different avenues in. And I thought it was so interesting that he's like, "Oh, this is a book about typecasting," because that's not what I thought about when I was writing.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, can you tell me a little bit about your journey to this book? So, what did you study? So, you have a theater background, you have a rapping background. What
Yeah.
is your trajectory from like,
Of
let's
course.
start from like college. What did you study?
Yeah, so I studied acting.
Okay.
I knew from as a kid, I played Bottom in middle school, and then again in 8th grade. And then again in high school. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's it. I'm going to be an actor."
Okay.
So my parents did not have the traditional Middle Eastern reaction of like, "Don't do that."
Really? What was their
My
reaction?
parents are awesome, man. They were
Okay,
they
good.
were just like, "Yeah, you should you should go and be the best actor."
Amazing.
I mean, like, yeah, it's kind of like, it is weird. I'm stuck in between being like a child of immigrants and also like being like a millennial who like was told that they can have everything.
Amazing.
So
Fantastic.
yeah, so my parents were very supportive. I went and I auditioned at the very beginning in Tucson. I didn't really do any of my research because I was like, "Oh yeah, I got this. I'm set for life. I'm the best. I'm one of the best actors who's ever lived." as like a 15-year-old kid in Tucson.
Amazing. Okay.
And so I was just like, "Okay, I'm gonna go to the U of A because that's Arizona is right down the street."
Uh-huh.
So I went there. I studied. I auditioned. I got in, and then I got kicked out. I got kicked out of that school, and that was
Why?
that was a really formative moment because I was a punk. I was like a kid who had a really big ego, and
Okay.
to this day, I don't know if they should have kicked me out. I think, really, genuinely, what happened is like, now I feel like I'm airing grievances.
Yeah,
But no,
what
no,
happened? I'm so curious now.
no.
You can't leave it.
I know. Well, when you're an actor in all these like collegiate BFA programs, like conservatory programs, the first 2 years generally you don't perform in front of audiences. And the first couple of years, you work as a backstage crew for the upperclassmen who are performing. And I was doing my crew one night, and they were doing a musical called "She Loves Me," and the director was keeping everyone super late, and I was really cranky, and I didn't quite understand the reasons that I was there, and At one point, like the director stopped the show and came backstage and like yelled at me for like missing one of my cues as like a stagehand, and I just like lost it. I was like, I said something stupid about like it's not my fault that this show is falling apart, like and I just like I could tell that really sat not well with him, and I probably shouldn't have said that. But yeah, he was like one of the heads of the program, and I to this day I think that I was like, I wish that they could have just like disciplined me in the moment, but they waited till the end of the year and then they cut me, and that was really weird, man. There's so much that I'm skipping here because there's so much about that story that can be interpreted in many, many ways. Like genuinely, they cut, and I'm not trying to like, look, this is just like a stat. You can look it up. I'm not trying to like, but they cut so many kids of color that year. It was wild. Like some of the more successful people to come out of that school got cut that year. And it was really, really interesting. And I don't want to dig into that, but that's always just like, it's just like always kind of floated in my mind of like, wait, what is happening? Like, yes, I was a dick. Like I can acknowledge that, but can we just like address that instead of cutting me from the program? So anyways.
Like a 19, 20-year-old, right?
Oh yeah. I was like 18.
Like a kid.
I was a kid.
18. Yeah.
So then, so then my story goes on, and actually I'm much better for it. And I'm actually very grateful that they did that. Like, to be honest, I'm not throwing shade. I think I'm a better human and a better artist because they did that to me, because I had to really sit down and think like, do I want this? Like I can just go into my dad's business, live a comfortable life in Tucson and, call it a day. But I was like, no, I really want to do this. So I auditioned for, all the schools that I never auditioned for in high school. Right. I ended up going to Carnegie Mellon, which is like one of the best acting schools.
Amazing.
And yeah, it was really, really cool. And when I got to Carnegie, it felt like a second lease on life, right? Like I was like, I don't want to mess this up. And the first 2 weeks of school is when I met PigPen. Like we were all freshman boys in the acting program. And we didn't know we would be best friends for 16 years. We were just like, oh yeah, these 7 guys they seem to like each other. Let's all make something together. And so we started writing plays together and performing them every year at school. And those plays eventually ended up going to New York City. We transferred them to New York City over the summers while we were still in school. We would go to New York and perform them over the summers. And we ended up winning the Fringe Festival 2 summers in a row, which was like really, really huge for us. This is back when New York Fringe existed, and it's like this beautiful festival. And yeah, so then PigPen really became the driving thrust of my career for a very long time. The 7 of us kind of made a commitment to each other that after we graduated, we were all getting, Broadway, TV, like auditions, and a lot of us were getting really far. Some of us were getting offers, and it really kind of threw our agents that like we were saying no to certain things because they were like, you guys are kids out of school. You just came out of one of the best programs in the country, and you're saying no to an audition or a show because you want to go play with puppets in a barn in Massachusetts. Like, are you insane? And at the point at that time, it's a little bit of like that, the ignorance of youth, the naivety of youth. I was like, no, this is more fun. And it's become just like the greatest thing in my life. We get to, so PigPen has, written, 4 or 5 musicals now. We've released 2 albums. We've toured the world as a band, and it's just been step by step. Like every year it's gotten a little bigger. And tomorrow, actually, by the time this comes out, we're announcing our first Broadway musical. So we're
amazing. Congratulations. This has been a common theme with people I've been talking to, this idea of like doing good work for a really long time. That's exactly what it is. And it compounds over time, like becomes something. But you had like that conviction to like just keep going each year.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with like, I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing, right? Like
absolutely.
Like you've been doing this forever. I've been listening forever. And now I feel like you're like one of the foremost voices on Iranian podcasting.
It's just like one step at a time. Like, okay, here we go. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's so cool. And like that to me is the takeaway for anyone trying to do anything. Like
totally.
Like do not like I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you feel about this. I wanted success immediately. Yeah. Like of course I did. I was like, yeah, I want to
But somehow you had this like long-term vision.
I mean,
maybe not even long-term. Again, it's just like doing one step at a time and just like you'll eventually get there.
Certainly. I think it's always a balance of hubris, hubris and
Absolutely.
and passion, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, when you're like not feeling passionate or when you're not feeling well connected to the thing, you got to just fall back onto this like hubris sense of like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
But when you don't have that, oftentimes the more important thing is like having the craft, having love of the craft, having
Yes.
love of these conversations for you, or for like, writing for me or performing, and like trying to understand how these things are all linked. That stuff will get you through the next 20 years if you really care about it. Like that
Yeah.
stuff is like that you can't figure it out. It's an unsolvable puzzle that we're all obsessed with,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So coming back to the book, so you started this 3 years ago.
Yeah.
What part of the journey did you all of a sudden like book?
Yeah.
When did you?
Oh, great. Okay.
Because
So
it's a different skill set too, right?
It's a different.
I mean, you wrote it, and also how did? I mean, I have so many questions. I'll
Okay.
go.
I'll stop
also-
talking as long.
No. Also, how did you come up with this format?
Okay.
Like, what is this? Where's this all from?
Of course.
Please tell me everything.
Yeah. So, first of all, it's a novel in verse. I'm definitely not the first person to do it. There are many novels in verse that I actually I've only read one before I really wanted to start writing one. I read this book called Out of the Dust. I think it's taught in a lot of schools. It's about the Dust Bowl. It feels very dated by now. Like it feels very like kind of, it's like, it's like a critically acclaimed novel about the Depression that you're supposed to read in high school. And those are the novels that kind of kill my love of reading. But I'll always remember opening it up and being like, oh, this book looks different. Like it's literally looks different. It looks like a bunch of poems. So that stuck with me. And then 2016, Donald Trump is elected. And it makes me really wonder what the hell I've been doing with my life. I called all my friends who were lawyers and I was like, I think I want to go to law school. And
Yeah.
And they're all like, don't do that. They were like, it's not what you think it is.
Okay,
Arya.
Good thing you called them. Okay.
No, I mean, they're like, I love them. My
Yeah.
two best friends are lawyers, and they were like, no, don't do that. And they were honestly, and they were like, and my therapist even was like, I think you're making this out to be, because to be honest, law has always been the other thing in my brain.
Right.
When I was a kid, it was always like actor or lawyer. And I thought it was so funny that my parents were so gung-ho about me being an actor, because like everyone knew the other thing that I was considering was law.
Interesting.
But so Donald Trump is elected. I decided, okay, I have to do something. I'm not going to go to law school. I'm in the middle of touring with PigPen. And so I wrote a rap, which is something that I hadn't done since really early college or high school. I used to, write little raps and poems all the time, but I just hadn't done it for a long time. And I wrote a little rap called "The Thing About America," and I uploaded that literally, I think 2 days after Trump was elected, maybe the day after, and it got shared around. On socials, and one of the people who saw it was my literary agent, who I've already had, which I'm very, very fortunate. They are the gatekeepers to the publishing industry for sure.
Wow.
But I got a literary agent many, many years ago through my work with PigPen, but I'd never written anything for her.
Oh,
And so she texts me. She's like, so I watched your rap. You need to write a novel in verse.
Wow.
And I texted her
Amazing.
back and I was like, you're crazy. I was like,
Wow.
I can't do that. That's
Yeah.
a novel. I can't write a novel.
What?
Like what? No.
Wow.
And she's amazing. She's one of the people that the book is dedicated to. Her name is Rebecca Sherman. She's an incredible human being. And
Wow.
so I was like, no, I can't. And I remember I was like, how about this? How about we try to take that rap that I just wrote and sell that? Like we can sell that and make that into a little picture book. And she was like, yeah, okay, I'll try. Like, and we'll put a package together and we'll send it out. But you should write a novel in verse. I'm not going to let that go. And I was like, no.
Wow.
I was like, okay. So, we sent that out. It didn't go anywhere, but it got some good responses from some of the publishers. They were in the process of pairing me with illustrators, but I realized like, oh, you know what? I'm trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I wrote that as a rap. It was very good for what it needed to be, but it's not a children's picture book. I'm not gonna spend time making it one because it just didn't feel honest. Then in 2019, the more and more PigPen grew. So this is 3 years later. We were working on our musical, The Tale of Diaspora. We were doing it at the Old Globe, actually, in San Diego.
Nice.
And I'm watching the way the rehearsal room is playing out. And at that point, the way PigPen works, it's changed over the years. It's really evolved. There's 7 of us. Everyone's super talented. But I realized how much sway the writing had in this room, right? Like, Dan Weschler is our primary writer in the group, like script writer, and he's actually one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. And I just remember looking at Dan and being like, man, what he's doing right now is incredible. Like, everyone in this room is throwing ideas at Dan, and his job, his ridiculous job, is to go home. And we've already been working on this script for 4 years together. His job is to go home and like take all of this in and like make something up in his brain that addresses all these things. I just thought it was magical. And look, I've known Dan for a long time. I've known Ryan, Curtis, Matt, like all the guys, like we all can write. But in that moment, I'll just never forget that moment in our rehearsal. I was like, oh, I want to try to do that. Like, I just want to try to do that. So I started writing poems. I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do something from scratch for Rebecca, my agent. I'll try to start writing a couple poems. And I think during the course of my run at San Diego, I wrote 20 poems.
Wow.
And I sent them to her. And then she was like, yeah, no, this is it. This is it.
Oh, wow. That gave me chills. Good.
Yeah. So she's like, you have to write this. And I was like, okay, I'll see you in 5 years. because I was like, there's no way I can write a book. It took me, 4 months to write 20 poems. And I think the book has over 300 poems in it.
Wow.
But then, next year, 2020, we had this big world event. And I had
can you take me back to?
Yeah. So 2020 was the year that I got some time. I got some time, and I wrote every day for a year and a half. And
wow. And what precedent did you have? Any precedent for? Is it a young adult novel officially?
Really,
okay, so is that what you wanted to do?
I'm so glad you asked this question, truly, because I don't believe in any of that stuff.
Okay,
No, you are absolutely right. And it's just to be completely honest. Yes, it's a young adult novel. It is being marketed as such. It is being published as such. It is a book from Harper Children's Division. Like, it is very much in the YA machine.
Okay.
That being said, my experience with PigPen has taught me that, like, we wrote those stories for our friends. Right. We wrote those stories for like 22-year-old college kids, but we wrote them in the style of Pixar, right? We wrote them in a style that, like, anyone can access this if you want. If you want to bring yourself openly to this story, we think you're going to like it.
Right.
And honestly, that's kind of how I write my poetry. Like, yeah, there are some technical things that make it YA. Like, Omid is, he's a 15-year-old kid, and generally your protagonist's age kind of dictates where the story fits in the marketplace.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's a whole nother lesson I learned. Like, when I drafted the piece, he was originally a freshman, like I was during 9/11, but we actually aged him up for a bunch of reasons. And I think they fit really well now, but they were not the initial kind of expression of the idea. And a lot of those reasons have to do with, like, how the book fits into curriculums and what the marketplace kind of needs and wants. So, like, that stuff's kind of important to me. Like, I'll have those conversations, but frankly, like, yeah, when I think of genre, it's really hard for me because I'm like, yeah, I guess it's a novel in verse. I guess it's YA, but I'm 36 years old and I like it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I
never got that sense. I just, and I'm not in that world, so I don't know, but I did notice, like, yeah, YA or whatever, but what precedents did you have for that? Like, did you look at anyone else who was writing, or, who are your peers in this now Iranian YA fiction?
I mean, the big one, his name is on the cover. His name is Daniel Nayeri, and Daniel wrote a book a couple years ago called Everything Sad is Untrue, and it just kind of exploded in that space. It blew up in that space, and he is a really singular person. I got to meet him through some PigPen stuff, and it was weird. I mean, the way I met Daniel is so weird because I basically read his book over the pandemic as I was writing mine, and I decided, okay, well, I quit.
Right? Yeah, that book is. Yeah. I've just started it.
Oh, you're
recently.
reading it?
Oh, yeah, I'm reading it because we're gonna talk soon. But
let's go.
Yeah,
I'm glad you got Daniel.
But I started reading it and I was like, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
It's
So-
really good.
Yeah, Everything Sad, I think, is the light. But here's what's funny is like I read that when I was 250 pages into my book, right? I was already like well into the process. So, and actually this just happened with a completely different author, Khashayar Kabushani, who just wrote I Will Greet the Sun Again. And we've also kind of become friends because I'm reading all these books that take years to write, right? And we don't know each other. We all don't know each other just like because this is not the way the world works. We're just like in our corners writing these books. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much overlap that like I feel immediate kinship with these people. Not only because we're Iranian and we're writing about these things, but also because like we've sat down at a computer and we've tried to put them into words.
Yes.
So
well, it's not just that, but it's also it's not just 4 or 5 years. It's like 16 years that you've been at least, this journey has been this whole thing. It's been PigPen. It's been like your college. It's been all this. We've all been just like quietly in our corners working. And it does feel like this explosion of like, we found each other.
I mean, the other one that I know you've spoken to, I know you spent time with is Aryan, right? Like Aryan and I have, and we're not the best of friends, but we've been friends for many years, and we've been in and out of each other's lives momentarily in New York, and there's so much overlap, like with what he did with Waterwell and what I did with PigPen. Like I feel like there's so much like, we each have our things that we're doing while also being Iranian-American.
It's fascinating. Yeah, exactly.
And he actually, Aryan did a production of Hamlet a couple of years ago that I give him a shout out in my acknowledgments because I watched that. So this is actually another fascinating part about our community and how it functions.
Yeah.
I watched that show. I went to watch it and I sat there in the audience, and actually I had got an audition for that show, and I didn't go because I was doing stuff with PigPen on the road. And I sat there and I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I not a part of this? Right? Like not like in a selfish or egotistical way, but I was like, why have I not done anything professionally that deals with my culture? Like it really kind of struck a chord. And also it was freaking Hamlet. The dude was on this wavelength, way before I was. Like I obviously love Shakespeare, but I never ever thought of like, okay, there's a connection here. And, as I was writing, I got to talk to Aryan a little bit about how he did that. And yeah, I don't know. So you're right. There is this like really beautiful kind of moment that's happening. And I think we should all acknowledge it. And also I watched my parents' generation kind of like compete with each other over that like scarcity mindset of like, gotta be the Iranian, that's like crushing it. And I'm like, no, we can all crush it. We can all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, so you started writing it in 2019, or the idea came up in 2019, and you're slowly working. So what was and the pandemic happens, and what was your process for writing? How do you even figure that out? Like, were you like doing the everyday, like write a little bit, or what was the process?
I mean, dude, a really good day is if I can write one poem.
Right.
If I can write if I can write one
wait, how
poem.
many is it? Hold on. Let's look.
I
mean,
know.
I'm sure you know.
No,
this.
I think it's like
It's not numbered.
No, it's not numbered. I think it's like 295, something like that. It's right around 300. And those are just the ones that made it into the book. And first of all, terrifying because I'm writing the second one right now, and I'm like, at the poem 30. I'm at like poem 30 right now. I'm like, oh my God, it's never gonna get done.
Amazing, yeah.
It's like, oh, it's never good. But yeah. So the process was every morning, and it really kind of became a ritual during the pandemic. And I've learned this about myself. I write best around 6 a.m., which is insane because I'm a night owl.
Wow,
So,
no way.
Yeah, I
So
really.
what time did you go to bed to do that?
Well, I mean, like eventually, once I realized, Arya, you got to start getting up early. Like my body just couldn't do it anymore, and I would start falling asleep around midnight. But
Oh God.
Night. Yeah, no. I mean, midnight's early for me. I mean, to this day, my wife is just like going to bed at 11, and I'll look at her and I'll be like, "You're going to bed?" She's like, "It's 11 p.m. Yes, I'm going to bed. So yes, I would wake up every morning. Really. I mean, I've never told this. I mean, I haven't talked about this book much, but I've never said this to anyone. I wrote this book in my mom's house in Tucson, like the big chunk of it. The big chunk of the book got written in Tucson during the pandemic, where I was living at my mom's house. She was living in Houston at the time. And my mom's house in Tucson happens to be the house that my grandparents used to live in on the other set of grandparents, actually the set of grandparents that's not in the story, but it was really weird. Every morning, my mom's office is actually the room that my grandfather, who's passed away now on my dad's side, I remember who I had by far the littlest relationship with, because, you know, he was kind of like, you know, an elder Iranian man, and I was, and he was very reserved and quiet, and I was very young. And so the way these things happen is like my core memories of him are like going into that house, and in the room that I actually ended up writing in, what used to be like his little gym, like he was like, you know, he was like one of those like he had those big Iranian pins. I don't know if you've seen those.
Nice,
Like,
of course.
So he would do that. Like that was his exercise.
Wow.
So I actually wrote most of the book in the room that he would do that in, and it just always felt really special, because I was like, I just like every morning 6 a.m. and I would write for 2-3 hours, maybe 4 hours if it was a good day, and then I'd move on with my life, and that was really the only way to do it, because I think I would have.
And at the time, the theater was shut down?
Yeah.
Okay, so this was your only thing that you were doing?
Yeah. Yeah, which is huge. Yeah. You know, PigPen was trying to figure out how to do like music stuff. We wrote a bunch of songs together, and we released some new songs, but like, yeah, theater and touring was the dominant force in my life for the past, 10, 15 years. So
when did you finish?
I finished right as the pandemic was opening.
Wow.
So I'll always remember the auction for the book happened the first weekend of the storytelling festival at Little Island. So PigPen curated this festival for a couple summers at Little Island in New York City, and I just remember that being a crazy weekend, because I had gone from sitting in my room either in Tucson and then later in LA. I lived in LA for most of the pandemic for years, and then all of a sudden the world is back open. I'm curating a huge festival in New York City, and my book is being sold that weekend. And so it was like a big transitional moment. And then look, the reality sets in. The book, the auction happens. There's all kinds of weird stuff that you learn about the publishing industry and auctions and stuff like that. But once I had my publisher, I had the editor, I was like, great, let's do this. Let's lock in, like send it to the printers. and they're like, no, you are rewriting this thing like 3 more times. So that was the real, and my editor, Ann Hoppy, is a freaking genius. Like, I'm just so grateful that I got to have that experience, because that's really, I think, when things come alive.
Totally.
When you have to share them with somebody who's smarter than you.
The rewriting process too. Just like that's when it gets like written, right?
I mean, yeah, like there's so many threads in this story.
Yes.
And she's the one that was like, they need to come together. Like all the stuff at the end with, An Impossible Thing to Say, all the stuff with Omid finding words in the way that he does at the end.
Yeah. When did the title change to An Impossible Thing to Say from The Weaver's Tale?
Just The Weaver. Just The Weaver.
The Weaver. Okay.
Yeah, it changed after the sale, so it sold as The Weaver. I want to say it's changed maybe a year after, maybe on the second draft after. I think Anne, my editor, knew how much that title meant to me. And I think she kind of let me down easy. She she broke it to me easy. She's like, I think we're gonna have to change it. She's like, and I will say, you never know in life. Like I actually think An Impossible Thing to Say is such a better title, because The Weaver has these, even though like thematically it might be correct, it has these like kind of overtones of exoticism that I don't love.
Oh, interesting.
And I always kind of like struggle with that. I'm like, do I really want to write about a Middle Eastern kid and call the book The Weaver? Like I was like, I don't want to play into that.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I think I landed on something that's actually a lot more truthful, which is it's about him trying to speak.
Oh yeah, it seems like the perfect title. And then, so when did the Mahsa Amini? When was that in context of what was going on?
Well after.
Well after.
Well after. I mean, Mahsa happened about a year ago, right? So
yeah.
I had I was pretty much done at that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was weird. I mean, this is also, we should talk about all that, because like it's tough for me, because I think another moment that we interacted before, like really getting to know each other, is I wrote this silly little post on Instagram about the USA-Iran soccer game. And that was like the thing that got shared most widely ever of any of the things that I've ever made.
Amazing. Yeah.
Because Instagram just loved it and like people shared it. And
Right.
I wrote about it the morning of, the Iran USA soccer game because I'm a huge soccer fan. fan. I watch constantly. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, this is a weird feeling. Like everyone's texting you being like, USA or Iran, which side are you on? I'm like, yeah, you do not know the metaphorical minefield that you are making me step through. But I'll say this. It's so hard to watch what's happening in Iran because every one of us has such a complicated relationship with it. And I think every one of us wants to have pride for our culture and our country, but many of us think that country has been taken hostage. And I use that term knowingly that it's loaded. And so what do you do, right? What do you do? And I can only behave in a way that feels honest to me. And frankly, I remember feeling so much hope in 2008. And that was like, for those of you that are just hopping on the Iranian revolution bandwagon, like that was the first one. That was the one that was supposed to be it. And I remember 2008 was the year that Obama was elected. I was like, oh my God, the world, it's doing it. We're doing it. Like, like you're doing it, Peter from Hook. Like we're flying. And I was so, I don't know, man. Again, I was young. I was so hopeful that like, oh my God, the regime's going to fall. I'm going to be able to go to Iran and celebrate. And it didn't. It just didn't. So when Masa happened, I think I was just tentative compared to a lot of my Iranian friends. I think a lot of people were like, this is the one. And I was like, I don't know if it's the one. And like, I'm not trying to say that like, I don't want it to be the one. Oh my God, like, let's go. Let's get them out. Like, I'm done. I'm so tired of this. But also, it's not wholly mine, right? I don't live in Iran.
Right.
I have family there. I know how difficult it is, but like, it's a really difficult to be a kind of a mouthpiece for an entire culture. You're not. You can only be a mouthpiece for yourself.
A little bit, but I also like when it's like it's not ours or whatever. I do think it's not by choice. Like your family's not here by choice. Like are they Baha'i? Is that a part of? Okay,
Yeah.
so they have
My mom
also.
is. Yeah.
That's huge. Like they're also, you have this like. And did you have an aunt that was killed and all that?
So
that was all true too.
So it wasn't my aunt. It was my my grandfather's
sister.
It was his brother in real life. So I changed it to sister because I again wanted to create some space just to allow myself to be creative.
Okay.
Because also like this is also true. When I grew up, I always was like, oh, I'm gonna write that. I'm gonna write that story. I'm gonna write this crazy story that my family actually had to go through. But as I grew older, I realized like I have so many drafts of like scenes with my grandfather speaking to his brother before his brother's execution. And it's like really heavy stuff. This actually happened. Man. But the more I wrote into it, I was like, I don't know. This is not my story. I'm making too many jumps for where I am as an artist. I'm not saying that I'll never touch it, but for where I am as an artist, everything changed when I was like, wait. People will care just like about my story, like about the kid that heard about all these atrocities. Wow. Like you're telling me like, I don't need to write about the atrocity. I can just write about the effects of the atrocity and people will still find value in that. That is really powerful because I always wrapped up my worth as an artist in the trauma that my parents experienced.
Right.
And I have to continue processing what it means to be a product of some of that trauma, right? And in a lot of my raps, I write about like feeling this connection to the Iranian version of me, the version of me that was born and raised in Iran.
Yeah.
But that version of me isn't real. My parents wouldn't have even met. Like it's crazy to think that like, no, Arya, stop thinking about that. It would be so vastly, I don't know. I'm embracing my Americanness as much as I'm embracing my Iranianness. And that to me is super powerful because I'm so tired of other people telling me what that's supposed to mean.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah. But I do think I think that a lot when, with these things that are happening, I feel like this has really affected everybody so much, and a lot of people don't really know why it's affecting them so much this past year, all these protests happening and everyone got involved. And I think a lot of that is just from this feeling of all of a sudden realizing like we were more connected to Iran than we thought,
How's it for you? I mean, how was it? Just like how's it been for you?
I think that similar to you, like I was very skeptical in the beginning, more than a lot of people. Like I didn't really post about it. I didn't really, because first of all, I was like, I don't know what's misinformation, what's like not misinformation too, because, a lot of people have been killed over the past few years over things in Iran. Like, why was it that this was the one that like all of a sudden blew up in this way? I just was skeptical. But then, and also like I had my daughter was born October 1st. So it was just like 2 weeks after that happened.
Oh
so
my
all
gosh.
these videos were coming out of Iran and, I was like,
Yeah.
I
No.
can't watch these things. I can't.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like from what I'm hearing too, a lot of people write me and people are feeling more connected to Iran than ever, and feeling more connected to Iranians. And so I think that it's amazing that I think it was all happening below the surface. People have been slowly, like we've been saying, working over the years, and all of a sudden there's this just convergence of people. And like, so yeah, that's that's kind of everything that I'm seeing is like we're all being connected more, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's an amazing time for a book like this to come out.
I mean, I appreciate that. I think they, not to like rain on my own parade, but I'm just being honest. I am a person who like, I'm constantly doubting many narratives, right? And
yes. Oh, yeah.
And for me, it's so hard to just like be like, wait, am I taking advantage of this moment?
Right.
Like, what is happening? What is happening? Like, this is the craziest year of my life. And I don't revert to like, where were you all before? Like, I know some people do, and I get that. I totally get that. I think they have a different relationship with this experience than I do, and they have their reasons. For me, I'm like, okay, this is way bigger than me. This is not about my career. This is like, Arya, get out of your own freaking head, dude. But we can only experience life through our own minds, right? And so, yeah, it's having a legitimate impact on my life. And I just, I don't know. You start wondering, like, this is like a seismic moment, and I just happen to be a part of this wave. Yeah. And I have to be grateful for the things that it's brought me, but I also have to be very, very considerate and also acknowledge that like it's not guaranteed. Not like this. None of this stuff is guaranteed. Like, keep your head down. Keep telling the stories that you think matter. And I'm really happy that this story was timed in a way at a time that people might respond to it, and it might resonate with people. That makes me very happy.
Me too. I think that, they say like write the story you wish you had at that age. This is absolutely the story we all wish we had, right?
Merci. Yeah, I'm definitely the one I wish I had.
I mean, a story about Shakespeare and
in Arizona.
Yeah, like, in Arizona.
In Arizona of all places. It's been cool. It's been cool.
Yeah,
and also, go.
Well, have you seen the story Junam? Have you watched Junam yet, or do you know? Okay,
not yet.
So you know that it's also Baha'i, it's also grandparents, it's also. These stories have been there, and it's just it's amazing that all of a sudden like these stories are being told, like we need them, and I think we all have an insatiable thirst for these type of stories.
Oh, I was starved for it.
Exactly.
It's crazy. I mean, your podcast is a huge part of that. Like, really, I don't have that many Iranian friends. Like, I just don't. So I want to ask you about that. What is your relationship with the diaspora right now? And what is like? I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. Yeah. Okay. A long time listener, first time caller.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It feels weird to even. Look. Obviously, I'm joking. Like, there's an instant connection to someone when we meet and we have these experiences in common, and it brings me so much joy. It brings me so much joy to like be in a room with other Iranian Americans. because it's educating me, right? Not only is it making me feel comfortable, which is always valuable, like feeling safe, feeling comfortable to say what you really believe, like those are important things. But it's also educating me on what the diaspora is, on what the differences of our experiences is something that I'm really leaning into now that I've gotten a publishing deal to broadcast my own experience. I'm like, okay, that's done. Now, like, shut up and listen. And it's been the most joyful part because, yeah, man, I mean, there's a lot of commonalities, but there's a lot of differences. You know, we contain multitudes, and so I feel like I'm one small part of the diaspora.
Amazing. And I love that. Yeah, I love that these stories are being told and like we're finding each other and no one feels like everyone's a legitimate part of the story, which is wonderful.
How is it for you hearing so many stories of people's lives that I'm sure have a lot of overlap? Like, how do you process it all?
Well, for me, so I grew up in Texas, right? So I'm not part of like the California experience. There weren't a lot of Iranians around me. Well, I'll take that back. My mom taught Farsi, so I grew up with this like every Saturday going to this Farsi school and everyone would come around. But I also grew up feeling really like weird. You know, I was like, oh, I'm not like other Iranians. I always had that thing. Like, okay, that's what Iranian is. I'm not that. Like, I don't like makeup. I don't like this. I don't like that. All these stereotypical things that I would see Iranians around. I was like, they just know how to dance. I just don't know how to dance. Like that. I'm missing being Iranian. And so it wasn't until I got to college that I kind of met my people and I was like, oh, it's not that I'm not Iranian. I'm just weird. And like, I found other weird people.
Yep.
Like, you're not, Americans don't all get along.
Who are your people?
Well, like Farid is a big part of that, like I work with him a lot. He's a musician, Farid Shafi Nouri. We became friends and that was like a big part of it. Like we had this small group of friends, maybe like 5 or 6 of us. Mayam Rostami is in San Francisco. She was the president of the Iranian Students Organization. So when I met her, I was like, you are so weird and you're so different. You are my people,
Yeah.
So then it was like, people in culture, you're not going to get along with people just because they're part of your culture. You have some shared experiences, but it's like that's kind of what I figured out. So right now, I'm married to an American. It's not like I have my family, but it's not like I hang out. Austin doesn't have like an Iranian scene really.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people doing different things. So I just appreciate being able to talk to, other creative people like you and like, I feel like we're finding our creative tribe in a way.
That's
and
really
it's
cool.
just nice to be able to share our experiences growing up and see the commonalities, like you said, and the differences.
Yeah. Yeah. Finding your weird people has been awesome. All right. Like, I think I have not felt that, and it's funny because a lot of that happens in that kind of gestational college phase where we're all like forming our adult identities. We're transitioning from childhood where we're just like trying to let the world tell us how to be. And then you're transitioning to like telling the world a little bit about how you want to be.
But yeah, you didn't marry an Iranian. I didn't marry an Iranian. Like,
No.
So it's not that's what I used to think that actually, like when I was growing up, I was like, if someone doesn't speak Persian, they're not going to understand me completely.
Really?
Oh yeah. I would think that.
That's
like,
really interesting.
Yeah, because I grew up speaking and it was always a big part of my identity to be able to speak. I grew up in a house with my grandparents also. So that was a big part of it. My grandfather was like my soulmate and we'd talk all the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
So he got me
amazing.
really into like Persian poetry. That's why I'm so into it. But yeah, I would always think that. And now like my husband, I shouldn't admit this on the podcast, but he can he can only understand like a few words like Nuna Panir.
Yeah, let's go.
People always write me, they're like, how do I get my spouse interested in learning Persian? I'm like, I don't know. When you figure it out, tell me. I have no idea.
That's amazing.
Why do you think I know? I just teach people.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So then I don't know. Now I think that there's a lot more to understanding a person than language, Language is a part of it, but I feel like my husband understands me completely without knowing Persian. So
yeah, I connect to that. I mean, like seriously, and it's fascinating because like you said, your mom taught Farsi, so I get how that is like a part of your worldview as a kid. because for me it wasn't. I always just assumed like, oh, this is like the weird thing that my parents do, right? But for you it was like, no, this is like this very important core tenet of my family. So yeah, it's beautiful.
And it is my love language. Like this is the language I speak with my kids. So there, let's take it back to that. What do you think? You've mentioned you might have children in the future. What are you thinking? Do you think it's important for them to learn Persian, or?
I think it's important for me to learn Persian.
Yeah.
No. I mean, it's like, it's funny. I continue to think like, well, this will be the year that I really like sit down and learn the way that I want to learn. But truth be told, like my favorite way of speaking Farsi is just in community, right? I'm less an academic, and it's funny because I really want to write about the Shahnameh. So I'm reading Shahnameh right now, and like,
oh, interesting.
yeah, and like and again, all I can do is really just bring my honest perspective to it as a kid who has the relationship with our culture that I have.
Are you reading the Penguin version?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm skipping around. Like I have a couple versions, but yes, that's the predominant one. And, you know, all I can do as a dad is be honest with my kids about what was important to me, and be honest about what's important to their mom. And honestly, like, I don't know, I'm not going to put as much pressure on it, you know, which can backfire. Okay. So here's what's funny is like my parents growing up, this is great. they're going to love that I'm broadcasting this. Growing up, you know, religion is a big thing.
Yeah.
In the Iranian culture, you know, my dad is Muslim and my mom is Baha'i, and they kind of took the approach that like, we're not going to pressure the kids.
Okay.
We're going to let them you know, come up with their own worldview. We're just going to support.
So you're both godless heathens.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like, oh, I don't believe in any of that. Like I'm so atheist that it's like gotten to the point where my parents are getting older. They're like, oh my God, we've damned our children. We've damned our children. Yeah. We've damned them to hell.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't care about religion at all in terms of like how my kids are raised. But I do obviously care about language. Like I've dedicated a big portion of my brain space to it. And I think by maybe taking my hand off my foot off the pedal too much, it'll end up being like, oh, Dad, that's just Dad's weird thing. He's like super obsessed with Farsi and English and how they intersect.
Right.
So, you know, maybe it requires a little bit more thought as we get more serious about having kids. But I do know that of all the places to be, I happen to be in LA right now. I've been living here for 3 years. And what's lovely about this place is that I can go out and just be surrounded by Iranians. And it's
cool.
It's wild. Like I've never had that before. Westwood is like Disneyland for Persian food. Like it's
sounds
just
fun.
Yeah, it's like, it's awesome. I mean, and you know, I will certainly be introducing them to the Persian cuisine.
Yes.
That is, if Baba can do that, I'm good. You know, like that's all I need. That's all I need. Yeah. But I don't know. Yeah. Nice. What about your kids? What are they?
Mine, I speak to them only in Persian.
Only?
Because it is that's the only language that I feel like I can express it's my love language. And it feels weird to me to speak to them in English.
Wait, that's amazing.
Yeah. But then when my husband's around, it's important for him to feel included. So usually I'll either speak English when he's around or I'll speak both. I'll be like, okay, I'll say the sentence twice. They understand completely. So they're 7, 4, and 10 months now. So
you have 3.
Yeah,
3. That's amazing. Yeah, okay, so and do you find that with your husband? Okay, I mean, give me a crash course, right? Like what are the conversations you guys had before that first kid?
Oh, about the language?
Yeah.
I mean, he knows that it's really important to me. So
yeah.
So that's why I started the Raising Nimrani's podcast, because I really just wanted to ask people how they were doing it. So, you know, I interviewed like Maz Chabrani, I interviewed like Reza Aslan. I was like, do you think it's important? They're like, it's super important. Your kids should know Persian. Like, okay, so do your kids know Persian? No. Like, okay, what did you guys... So everyone thinks it's so important, but no one's figured out how to do it, is what I figured out during that series. I probably interviewed like 10 people at the time. And everyone was like, we just couldn't do it, especially in the US. Like, there's just such a little amount of effort that's put into teaching kids a second language in the US. So I interviewed someone in Europe, and she was like, oh, it's easy. Just, speak. I was like, okay, it's easy for Europeans. That's
Oh
the
my
difference.
God. Totally. I mean,
Yeah,
they
it's
just
a
have
totally different
they
game.
have a comfort with being able to switch their identity like that,
So it's not like that here. And then I spoke to someone who did manage to keep her kids speaking, but then I was like, well, how's the dinner table? I always would ask that, like, what's the conversation like at the dinner table when your husband is like, oh, we have like 10 different conversations going on. My husband can't understand anything. And I was like, well, I don't really want that. Like, I want a dinner table where we're all talking and we're all having fun. And, my husband's very involved in the family, and it's not like he's this separate, person. So I don't know. It's complicated.
I mean, also, I think generationally, it's going to evolve and change, right? Like as I see my parents get older, I realize that so many of their values are important and shape me, but are not the values of the future, right?
Right.
And I think I am eager to be the best dad I can be, and to like really like care for my children and tell them, how important, how these things are important to me. But I'm also like, let them decide. Let them let them put value on the things that need to be valuable in the future. I really do believe, like, generationally, we are different than our parents.
The only problem is that there is a lot of resentment that comes from, like, a lot of the people that I talk to.
Yeah.
They do have one parent who's Iranian, and then now they're so resentful of, like, why didn't my parent speak to me in Farsi at this point? So there's that also. You don't.
Oh my God, no! I literally was like, why didn't my parents make me go to the gym more?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm like,
totally.
Wait, like, you just watched me just like eat 35 pizzas a week and never told me to go.
Totally.
Like, no, I hear you.
Or like our kids are in cello right now. The 7 and 4-year-old. It's every Wednesday and every Saturday. And this Saturday I was sitting there. I was like, is this the rest of I'm going to have to do that? Like, I'd rather be doing something else than like sitting here. But then I was like, it's really nice. Like, they don't appreciate it right now, but I feel like it's much harder for me to do this on a Wednesday and Saturday. But I think like eventually they'll be like, amazing that we know cello,
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's
No, yeah, I think you're right. You're right.
Kids are complicated.
Kids are complicated. You can only try your best.
Yeah.
I told my friend who just became a mom. She was also like really, I mean, she's been a mom now for a couple of years. They have 2 kids, but the first kid, they were like, having all these conversations about whatever, like best parenting practices. And I was like, you're gonna fuck up. I was like, and she literally looked at me and she's like, never, no, I can't, like, don't say that. I was like, of course you are. Like, that's the whole point, right? I think that's the whole point of, we are molded from our parents' strengths and their flaws. And if you don't have any flaws, like, yeah.
But I think having kids, like, what I will say is that it will force you to speak better. And like, if you do this thing, like, from the very beginning, just speak Persian to them. That would be my suggestion. Yeah. Because it'll be good for you too. Like, they don't know that you're messing up, like, and it'll make you better. And then Tuesdays, we have SpongeBob Farsi days. And we watch SpongeBob in Farsi, which is amazing.
As Koja SpongeBob from Farsi. Where are you getting that from?
So I should make a blog post where I put all this stuff up, because I just like typed in SpongeBob Farsi because I'd heard somewhere that they did a really good translation of it. It is amazing. They take all the jokes and it's all like culturally appropriate for kids. They use like Iranian songs. The actors that they had do SpongeBob were amazing. So,
I'm gonna watch that. I'm gonna watch
watching it. I would recommend it. So you'll learn a lot, and it's all like the new like contemporary Iranian speak. It's so good. Like, I didn't grow up with SpongeBob. I'm older than that, but I love SpongeBob Farsi. It's like,
dude, that's awesome.
Very, very cool. Yeah. So that's my suggestion. I'll write a blog post about that. Those resources. It's on something called Up Irooni, which is a little difficult to navigate if you can't read Farsi. But yeah, so this has now officially been the longest conversation I've had. So I know it just went by very, very quickly. But is there no, it's perfect. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to add to?
No, I mean, it's been a pleasure, and I'm super excited to get this book out there, and just to like continue meeting people and to continue being a part of the conversation and being a part of the community. It's beautiful. Like, guys, like we have such a unique thing happening right now, and every day I'm grateful for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you reading the Shahnameh and Kitab Club?
I was. So that's how I started. And then because of the book launch, I just got like crazy busy and super
Right.
I fell behind, and I'm gonna try to jump back in.
Okay.
But I need to like really do a session, like a deep session. Yeah.
Well, so I'll link to Kitab Club in
Yes.
the links to the show notes so that eventually I'm sure we'll read this as well in Kitab Club. But also, where do people find you? Where's the best place?
Yeah, just like the internet.
Okay.
Also in Los Angeles, just wandering the streets.
Yes.
No, yeah, I'm at Arya Shahi on Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff. But yeah, I think yeah, reach out if anything
So we'll
resonates.
link to all that in the show notes. This book comes out September 26th. So this podcast will be released before then. As soon as you listen to this podcast, go buy the book because I've heard first week sales are very important in the book getting to different whatever.
But yeah, like it means a lot, guys. Like if this resonates with anyone, I'm gonna be so touched. So thank you.
Yes, please buy the book and read it. I'm sure. I mean, all these messages that I get and emails that I get from people about their own experiences, I think this will resonate with you so much, and it's just fun to read. It was a lot of fun to read, and it makes you want to go read Shakespeare immediately. And
yeah.
And also, yeah, I wanted to. Oh, this is the last thing that I'll ask you.
What's up?
I feel like in the past year or two, I've been learning about Iranian rappers more, and one thing that comes up in here is about the cultural appropriateness of different modes of communication. He has friends that there's so much in the book that
I'm glad we got to this. This is
all day. Yeah. So has there been any experience that you've had with Iranian rappers now, or have you been listening to anything, or you want to talk about it a little bit?
I listened to it. Yeah, I definitely I listened to it. I think what's incredible is I listened to a lot of Iranian rappers, and then I started listening to a lot of Arabic speaking rappers because I think as a rapper, something that, or hey, you look, as a songwriter, I don't know, this is going to take a really weird tangent, but as a songwriter, one of the methods of writing songs is that you come up with melodies, or in rap, you come up with your cadence by mumble rapping or by gibberish rapping, just boom, boom. And like, then you go back and write the lyrics. So it's hilarious that listening to rap in Farsi is kind of that for me. Like I'm soaking in the cadences and the rhythms that are more not appropriate, but more natural to Iranian rappers, as opposed to the cadences and rhythms that are more natural and appropriate in the United States. So that's really beautiful. And then every once in a while I'll catch like a phrase. I'm like, oh, heck yeah, I got that. Like that hit.
Cool.
So yeah, I think the cultural conversation about rap is amazing. Like I could do another hour about this because I really genuinely believe that African-American artists have led the way. They created the form, but rap is a form of folk music. It's music of the people, right? And I grew up. I spent the past 20 years writing folk music, so I got into Woody Guthrie and like the real folk writers.
Wow.
And so for me, I really have a connection, and I talk about it more in the terms of Shakespeare and rappers in the book because, when I want to say this, I didn't want this book to be that like super tropey, high school English teacher brings rap into the classroom and like kids get excited about language. That's such a played out trope. But what's powerful, I think, in this book is it's the opposite. It's Omid finds rap and makes the connection on his own terms. And it's because of his relationship with Farsi that he's even able to do that, right? Like all those three things kind of lead to this one moment in the book where he brings in a rap CD to his English teacher. And it's like, she's almost caught off guard by like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, I can talk about this, I guess. It's really a part of his journey. And rap at its best is this gorgeous exploration of language and music and oppression. Our responses to oppression, our responses to the way the world sees us. When I rap, I take on a more aggressive or heightened emotional persona, right? I'm either writing from an incredibly vulnerable place, or from an incredibly aggravated place. I think those are the two places where rap, for me personally, works best. And so, yeah, I think the form is gorgeous. I think there's a lot of, hesitancy about who owns it. I don't think anyone can own it, but I do think that it was very much created by the Black community. And it's something that I have looked up too for years. And yeah, I don't know. It's complicated. I've talked to so many musicians about cultural appropriation and what's correct and what's not. And, you know, again, I go back to trying to have the best intentions, but also being super aware of your impact. And that's one of the reasons that like I'm not out here like trying to be a big rapper. Like I write rap as my own form of processing these feelings, and this novel feels like a much more true to form, you know, expression of like maybe who I am as a complete artist. But yeah, I've got like 3 rap albums that I'm just like sitting on. I'm like, maybe one day.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see.
Well, cool. We'll have to talk more about this in part 2 of this conversation. No, yeah.
Merci, no.
Well, thank you so much, Arya John, for talking with me today and for this wonderful novel. I really enjoy it. Thank you for sending it to me twice because
yeah, you got 2, baby. You got 2 early copies.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm
amazing.
very excited.
Nah, merci for everything that you do and for having these conversations. Hold on, I got a car. No, for having all these conversations and creating this space. Like I've messaged you, I've told you this, but it's incredibly important. You're doing really important work, and it's beautiful to witness. So thank you.
Same to you. Thank you so much. On that note.
Okay. All right.
All right.